It started with sticky notes, and ended with a lipstick-stained collar. They called it a joke. But when I opened that letter, I realized everything I knew about my marriage was a lie. Now I'm telling my story. Because silence? That's how they win. It all started on a Thursday night, one of those long evenings when everything seems to stretch endlessly, when you can't quite shake the feeling that something is about to shift. I hadn't planned on it, but as soon as I walked through the door, I knew. She wasn't there, not yet anyway. But the letter was. On the kitchen counter, beneath a pile of unopened mail, was a small, plain envelope. No return address. Just a thick, official-looking letterhead that immediately caught my eye. My pulse quickened as I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly. You don't need a law office to know that something's about to go wrong. I opened it, the words blurring for a moment, before they became sharp. We are writing to confirm your succession preferences regarding your estate. The letter made no sense. It couldn't. She'd never talked to anyone about it. No one but me. Not even our closest friends knew about the trust she'd set up, the one that she'd promised was for our future. But this was new. I scanned the document, my eyes catching on the signature. No. It wasn't hers. I knew it the second I saw it. My stomach sank as I reread the lines, as if they would somehow change. I looked up, staring at the room we had built together, the kitchen where we'd spend endless nights cooking, laughing, arguing about the smallest things. But this was different. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I had to leave before I did something I'd regret. I needed to understand what was happening, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. If it wasn't her, then who? My mind raced through a million possibilities, but none of them made sense. I had to go see her. I needed answers. And so, I found myself driving across town, my thoughts swirling. It felt like the distance between my house and my mother's cottage in the hills was the only thing keeping me from losing control. My mother, Elra, had always been the calm to my storm. Maybe it was her presence, her quiet wisdom, that I needed now more than ever. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the familiar sight of ivy crawling up the walls bringing a sense of calm. The smell of cinnamon and dried lavender greeted me as I walked inside. She didn't ask me anything when I walked through the door. She didn't need to. She saw my face and wordlessly led me to the kitchen, where she poured tea into chipped china cups, the same ones we'd used since I was a child. The tea was warm, comforting. But it didn't ease the tension in my chest. No amount of tea could fix this. Elra, I began, trying to steady my voice, I received something today. It's a letter, about the trust. She didn't look surprised, but there was something in her eyes, something that made me wonder if she already knew more than I realized. She slid the envelope toward me across the table, her fingers brushing the edges as if she had touched it 1,000 times before. I got this last week, she said, her voice soft but firm. At first, I thought it was junk. But I kept it, just in case. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, my heart racing. And there it was. The letter. The one that could change everything. I never signed anything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at her, my mind struggling to piece everything together. How could this be happening? If this wasn't her signature, then who had signed it? And why? My head spun. This wasn't just about the trust. It was something more. Something sinister. I stared at the envelope, not knowing what to do. Everything I thought I knew was starting to unravel, piece by piece. And then I remembered the strange phone calls, the texts from numbers I didn't recognize, the unexplained late nights she'd spent away. Were they all connected? Was this about something bigger than I was willing to admit? And there it was, the truth, slipping through my fingers like sand. I was no longer in control. But I knew one thing, nothing would be the same again. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was just the beginning. The quiet hum of the kettle filled the space between us, but the silence felt like a storm, waiting to break. As the tea cooled in my cup, I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on me. Whatever came next would change everything. There was no going back. Maybe it's time, I thought, finally meeting her gaze. Maybe it's time to find out who's really behind all of this. I knew it wasn't just about the trust. It was about everything that had happened before. And everything that was about to unfold. But for now, I needed to keep my focus. This was only the beginning of a much larger story. The next step? Finding out who else was involved. It was one of those crisp autumn evenings when everything feels eerily quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the backyard. The house seemed still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. For weeks, I had been trying to ignore the underlying tension that had been creeping into my life, but tonight, it became impossible to ignore. It all started innocently enough. Roger and I had been neighbors for over a year, and we'd shared a few beers on the porch, swapped stories about life, and laughed at the ridiculousness of our everyday problems. His wife, Alice, was a lovely woman, but it was Roger who had become, for all intents and purposes, my partner in crime. We'd pull pranks on each other, harmless fun that kept life interesting. Or so I thought. The first prank was simple. I came home one afternoon to find my car covered in sticky notes, hundreds of them. Each one had a different message, some funny, some random, but they were all the same shade of bright yellow. "You've been pranked." It read in bold letters. At first, I couldn't help but laugh. It was clever, if a bit excessive. But as I peeled each note off, I felt the first stirrings of something more. There was a part of me that was uneasy, but I dismissed it. After all, it was just a prank, right? But then came the second prank. This one involved my mailbox. I had just returned from a trip to the store when I found my entire mailbox filled with plastic spiders. Not small ones, mind you, giant, lifelike spiders that seemed to be watching me. It was as if Roger had been planning this for weeks, and I could tell he was enjoying every second of it. I chuckled nervously, but there was a twinge of discomfort in the back of my mind. It wasn't just the pranks anymore, it was the way Roger had been setting them up. There was a kind of joy he took in getting under my skin, pushing the limits of what was funny and what was too much. Then came the third prank. This one was different. It wasn't just a prank, it felt personal, invasive. I had gone out for a jog, trying to clear my head after a long week. When I returned, I found my front door wide open. My heart dropped to my stomach. I had locked it before I left. I stepped inside cautiously, and everything seemed normal. But as I walked through the living room, I saw it, on the couch, a note with my name scribbled across it in Roger's messy handwriting. "Had to borrow a few things. Don't worry, I'll return them soon. R." My pulse quickened as I scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt deeply wrong. I spent the next hour checking every corner of my house, making sure nothing was missing. The unsettling feeling lingered long after I'd convinced myself that everything was fine. Was this just a joke, or had Roger crossed a line? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the harmless fun I had once believed it to be. Days passed, and the pranks continued. Each one became bolder, more invasive. At first, I thought it was harmless fun, but it started to feel like something more. Like a game that Roger and his wife were playing, a game where I was the punchline. But what bothered me more than the pranks themselves was how much Flo seemed to enjoy them. Flo, my wife, was laughing along with Roger, even egging him on. It was like they had become a team in this bizarre game. And I was the one being played. It wasn't long before I started noticing something else. Flo's laughter, the way she looked at Roger, it was different. She didn't just find his pranks funny, there was an edge to it, a spark in her eye that made me uncomfortable. I tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself that it was all part of the game, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her reaction to the pranks began to shift. Where there had once been playful annoyance at the absurdity of it all, there was now a sense of excitement, even enjoyment. She didn't just laugh. She reveled in it. The distance between Flo and me began to grow. The pranks weren't funny anymore, they were a reminder of something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And the more I tried to confront it, the more I felt like I was losing her. It was as if she had found something in these pranks, something in Roger, that I couldn't provide. And then came the moment that shattered everything. One evening, Roger invited us over for drinks. I had been reluctant to go, but Flo insisted. We arrived at their house, and as usual, the atmosphere was light. Roger was cracking jokes, and Flo was laughing a little too loudly. Alice and I exchanged glances, both of us a little on edge, but we tried to keep up appearances. But something happened that night, something I didn't see coming. After a few drinks, Flo and Roger disappeared into the house. Alice and I lingered on the patio, chatting quietly. But when a half hour passed and they still hadn't returned, I started to get suspicious. Alice and I exchanged uneasy looks, and we decided to go inside. The air in the house felt thick with something I couldn't name. That's when we found them. Flo and Roger, standing in the kitchen, arms around each other, giggling as if nothing was wrong. My stomach turned. And then I saw it. Roger had lipstick on his collar, and Flo's hair was a mess. My mind raced as I pieced it together. The looks they exchanged, the way they stood too close, it was unmistakable. They had crossed a line. "Sorry, we got caught up," Roger said, his voice too casual. He tried to play it off, but I could see the smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Flo didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she stared at the floor, a nervous smile on her lips. "Caught up?" I asked, my voice tight with disbelief. "What's going on here, Flo? Why does Roger have lipstick on him? Why do you look like you've been kissed?" Flo's response came quickly, but it was hollow. "It's nothing. Just a joke, Jim. Nothing happened." I didn't buy it. Not for a second. I turned to Alice, who was standing there in stunned silence, her face pale. I could see the hurt in her eyes. She knew what I knew. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't harmless fun. This was betrayal. For the rest of the night, the silence between us was deafening. I could hardly look at Flo. I couldn't look at Roger. The entire evening had turned into something ugly. As Alice and I left their house, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The pranks were no longer funny. The jokes had stopped being jokes. That night, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about trust, crumbled. I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything I had seen. And just like that, I realized this was no longer about pranks. This was about something far deeper, and far darker. What would happen next? Would I ever be able to trust Flo again? And would Roger and I ever be able to go back to being just neighbors? The answers, I knew, wouldn't come easily. And I wasn't sure I was ready to face them. But one thing was certain, nothing was ever going to be the same again. The evening continued to weigh heavily on my mind, its aftermath lingering like a fog I couldn't shake. There was a sickening realization settling in, one that was hard to ignore. Flo's involvement in the prank, her flirtation with Roger, the way it felt like everything had slipped through my fingers, it all led to one conclusion. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was now gone. How could I ever face her again? How could I move forward knowing that this was what she had been hiding behind her laughter all along? Here is the image created for the section Discovery of the Affair. It captures the emotional tension and confrontation between the husband and wife, reflecting the moment of betrayal. The atmosphere and details are designed to evoke the complex emotions at play in this pivotal moment. It appears you provided some interesting narrative content involving a tense situation between characters, but the instruction needs clarification. Could you specify which exact part of the story or what aspect of the text you'd like expanded? Would you like me to focus on developing certain scenes, emotions, or building character motivations, as per your previous requirements? This will help ensure I provide exactly what you're looking for. Thank you. The transformation after a divorce is rarely an overnight process. It is a series of steps, each marked by small victories and painful realizations. For a man who had found himself standing in the debris of a once happy marriage, this journey of self-discovery began in the most unexpected ways. The first few days were filled with shock, the raw emotions of betrayal swirling within him like a storm he had no control over. His mind replayed every moment, every conversation, and every gesture, searching for the moment when everything began to unravel. In those moments of overwhelming pain, he would sometimes question if he had done enough, if he had been enough. These thoughts were like a fog that clouded his ability to move forward. His wife's departure, the emotional weight of her infidelity, and the collapse of everything he had once held dear, these events forced him to confront the very essence of who he was and what he wanted out of life moving forward. But time, as it often does, began to heal. As the days turned into weeks, he started to look inward. The anger that had initially consumed him slowly gave way to quiet moments of reflection. He found solace in solitude, where he could finally hear his own thoughts, unclouded by the noise of the past. It was in these moments of introspection that he realized that the healing process wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about rebuilding himself from the inside out. One of the most profound realizations came when he understood that the journey of healing wasn't linear. It wasn't as simple as snapping his fingers and moving on. There were days when the pain resurfaced, when memories would flood his mind, leaving him questioning if he had made the right choices. But with each passing day, he became more comfortable with the idea that healing takes time. His path forward was not going to be a quick fix, but a gradual evolution, much like the restoration of a home after a hurricane. A key part of this transformation was his relationship with his children. After the divorce, his connection with them deepened in ways he hadn't expected. The guilt he initially felt for not being able to keep the family together slowly morphed into a sense of responsibility, a responsibility to be the father they needed, to show them that even in the face of adversity, love and stability could still exist. He began to see his children not just as his kids, but as individuals with their own unique personalities and dreams. They were his anchor, keeping him grounded even when the world felt unstable. As he spent more time with his children, he began to see them in a new light. Their laughter, their innocence, their ability to bounce back from hardship, all served as reminders that life could still be beautiful, even after a profound loss. He began to understand that his pain, while deeply personal, didn't have to define him. His children were a living testament to the fact that life could go on, and that he could, too. Despite the healing he was experiencing, there were moments when he still felt the sting of betrayal. He couldn't help but wonder if he would ever be able to trust again. The fear of opening his heart to someone new, only to be hurt again, loomed large in his mind. Yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, he realized that moving on didn't necessarily mean rushing into another relationship. It meant rediscovering who he was and allowing himself to embrace the possibility of a future that was not defined by the past. His emotional journey wasn't about erasing the hurt, it was about accepting it as part of who he had become. He understood that healing was not about eradicating the pain but finding a way to coexist with it. Slowly, he began to open himself up to new experiences. He started to explore hobbies he had long neglected, things that brought him joy and peace. He took up painting, a hobby he had once enjoyed with his ex-wife, but now it became something for him alone. Each brushstroke was a step toward rediscovering his identity, one that was separate from the man he had been in the marriage. In the process of rebuilding his life, he also began to realize that he wasn't the same person who had walked into that marriage. He was different, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The lessons he had learned from the pain of divorce were invaluable. He had learned that love didn't always guarantee happiness, and that true happiness came from within. It wasn't about relying on someone else to make him feel whole, it was about learning to be whole on his own. The thought of a new relationship still lingered in his mind. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open his heart to someone else, but he was no longer afraid to think about it. He had learned that life was unpredictable, and sometimes the most unexpected things could bring the greatest joys. Whether or not he would ever find someone else was no longer his focus. What mattered was that he had learned to love himself again. His emotional healing also extended to his relationships with others. He found that his friends and family were more supportive than he had ever realized. They had always been there, but now, he saw them in a new light. His ability to lean on them, to ask for help when he needed it, and to accept their love without feeling weak was a testament to how far he had come. The walls he had once built around himself began to crumble, piece by piece. And so, as he moved forward in his life, he embraced the idea that healing wasn't an end point, but a journey. He wasn't over the divorce, and he didn't need to be. What mattered was that he was healing, growing, and moving on. He wasn't the man he had been when he first walked out of the marriage, but he was becoming the man he wanted to be. One day at a time. With each new day, he felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. The weight of the past didn't hang as heavily on his shoulders anymore. He had reclaimed his life. His heart, once broken, was now open again, ready to embrace whatever came next. The future, once a daunting unknown, now seemed full of possibilities, each one waiting to be explored. And in that moment, he realized that the greatest journey he had embarked on was the one that had led him back to himself. The journey through betrayal, healing, and the rebuilding of one's life after a devastating divorce is never simple or straightforward. It is a labyrinth of raw emotions, new realizations, and profound self-discovery. When betrayal enters the equation, it changes everything, not just the relationship, but also the very fabric of one's sense of self. The lessons learned from such an experience, though painful, can shape the trajectory of one's future in ways that were previously unimaginable. One of the key lessons learned from the pain of betrayal is the importance of trust and loyalty in relationships. Trust is the